On this edition of Independent Sources, Chaos in Cairo, as Egypt stands on the brink of perhaps toppling a 30-year regime.
Net semi-neutrality, the battle for one internet wages on in the wake of a significant ruling that could create a two-tiered system of access to the web.
And an emerging showcase for Black actors and filmmakers in Brooklyn. Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Gary Pierre.
And I'm Viano Ravinka. Over the last few days, most of the world media's collective eye has been set on Egypt. The images of protesters raging through the streets and calling for the ouster of President Hosni Mubarak have kept most of us transfixed.
Now, with word that President Mubarak will not seek re-election, the situation in Egypt has grown even more fluid. The U.S. finds itself in a situation where it must recalibrate its relationship with its strongest Muslim ally at a time when there is a mad grab for power from groups whose allegiances remain murky.
I spoke with journalist Khaled Dawoud, who is in Cairo, and political science professor Mitchell Cohen about the crisis in Egypt. Khaled, you're in the midst of Tahrir Square right now. Give us a sense of what's going on in the streets of Cairo right now.
Well, I can tell you that what's happening in Cairo right now is definitely unprecedented. Starting January 25th and for exactly a week, hundreds of thousands of Egyptians have taken this main square in downtown Cairo, basically agreeing on one demand, which is that President Hosni Mubarak has to go. Basically, because Mubarak has been in power for 30 years, we've never had fair elections under this president. And of course, what made it worse for the people is that President Mubarak wanted to hand over power to his son after he passes away or after he decides not to run again. So basically, you're seeing hundreds of thousands of people. And of course, because the police forces have collapsed, you can see a lot of tanks, army tanks in the streets. But the relationship between the protesters and the army soldiers and officers is very positive. They are helping each other. I've seen protesters giving the army soldiers food and drinks, and even the protesters themselves, and to deny the government propaganda that they are seeking some sort of destruction or some sort of sabotage. They are cleaning this square every now and then themselves. They're taking care of each other, and they're even checking the IDs to make sure that there are no infiltrators or anybody who carries something that might indicate that the protesters in Tahrir Square are not there except for one purpose, which is that President Hosni Mubarak has got to go.
What are the hopes that he will in fact go?
As a matter of fact, Zinora, when I'm speaking to you right now, we're expecting President Mubarak to deliver a statement in which the rumor is, at least, is that he's going to announce that he's not running for a sixth term. He's already been in power for 30 years, and he's making it sound like a concession in which he's going to announce that he's not going to run again for another 6 years. That's what people are expecting. I'm not sure that the people that are seen in this square are going to be happy with this because they want President Mubarak to leave right now. They don't want to wait until June or until September. He was supposed to officially announce his nomination in June, and then the elections were supposed to take place in September. What's expected is that he's going to say, I'm not going to run again, but I don't think the people here is going to be satisfied with this. The government is trying to blame the demonstrators, saying that they are halting the economy, that they are causing chaos. But the real reason for chaos right now is President Hosni Mubarak and him insisting to stay in power. If he announced tonight that he's leaving tonight or tomorrow, I think all these protesters will go home and the country will go back to normal. Nobody is happy that the country is in a state of curfew. People cannot get money out of the banks. People cannot buy food except in very particular hours during when they lift the curfew. So there is a problem, definitely. But the reason for this problem is not the protesters, but this president who's insisting to stay in power and not to leave.
One of the leaders, possible leaders emerging out of the crisis, who's in the forefront here in the U.S. media is El-Baradei. Is that the case as you see it on the ground there? And what do the people think about El-Baradei?
I think a lot of people have respect for him, but I won't prejudge or tell you that the majority of Egyptians support him or do not support him. First, Mubarak out, then a transitional government, and then we hold elections in which the Egyptian people choose their president for the first time in their lives.
I'd like to bring the discussion in studio. Mitchell, let's talk about the U.S. response to the crisis from the diplomatic and also the human rights point of view. Could President Obama have been stronger in his reaction towards the government in Egypt and to condemn stronger, as a lot of Egyptians would have liked the response from Mubarak?
I think American policy has been walking on a tightrope. It's a tightrope because, on the one hand, Egypt has been a long-time ally of the United States, decades of very good relations, and a desire not simply to walk out on a leader with whom they've had close ties. On the other hand, Americans tend to be very sympathetic to demands for democracy. It's well recognized that Mubarak's regime has been extremely illiberal and inflexible. From what we know nowadays from WikiLeaks and a number of other sources, the U.S. government has in fact for quite some time urged flexibility on Mubarak, and Mubarak has been quite inflexible. I think it's a type of tightrope. An American government on one hand doesn't want to interfere in the domestic political decisions of a country and tell a country what to do. On the other hand, there are certain political realities that it finds itself confronted with, and I think that's the real framework of what American policy has been dealing with.
I know that you don't want to venture in forecasting the outcome of the crisis, but what are the long-term implications of the situation for the Middle East?
Well, the implications are enormous, first and foremost because Egypt is such an important player in the Middle East. It's strategically important, it's economically important, partly because of the Suez Canal. It's important because of war and peace. It's now had 30 years of a peace treaty with Israel, which followed 30 years of war after war after war. So the results of what happens in Egypt are going to be extremely important. It's very, very difficult to hazard a guess as to what will happen now. There may be some type of compromise between the army and the demonstrators. All sorts of things can spin out of control. I think it's very, very difficult to predict what will happen. It's also very difficult to predict what will happen in elections as well. The only two really organized forces in Egyptian society are the military and the Muslim Brotherhood, and so we're just going to have to see what will come out of this.
Khaled, you have been in New York up until a couple of days ago, and now that you are on the ground in Cairo, thinking back of the media coverage here in the U.S. and seeing what's happening on the ground, do you think that the world is getting an accurate representation of what really goes on in Egypt?
To a great extent. I think to a great extent, just before I left, most American media channels got the point. But, some analysts do come out and kind of tend to scare whoever is listening by saying that this is a Muslim Brotherhood, or that the Muslim Brotherhood, there's a danger that they might take over. I want to assure you, by being on the ground, that this is a very popular revolt. Everybody is on the ground. The Muslim Brotherhood, the liberals, the leftists, everybody's here. This is not Muslim Brotherhood at all. I mean, the slogans that are being repeated in the streets are not Muslim Brotherhood slogans. They are there, they are participating, but not in the large numbers, and they are not taking over this entire protest and this entire revolt, if I might call it. And the other issue as well is that, the outside world, and of course, and I can understand in the West, in the United States, is afraid about Egypt's relations with Israel, for example, or even future relations with the United States. And as your guest said, we have a strong army, military establishment, and so far the people are not revolting against the army. I mean, the people don't even mind, as far as I hear, that maybe, as I said, someone like Omar Suleiman, who is now the vice president and the head of intelligence until he was appointed, take over for a transitional period and then hold elections. But the Egyptians are not, I mean, even as far as I heard, they haven't shouted slogans against Israel, they haven't shouted slogans against the United States. I've only been hearing one slogan: this regime has to go, Mubarak has to go. So these are really 2 points that I need to stress, that there is no fear of the Muslim Brotherhood, and this is not an anti-American or anti-Israel revolt.
Professor?
I don't think the point is whether it's anti-Israeli or anti-American or run by the Muslim Brotherhood. If you look at history, at great revolutions, big upheavals, they very often occur with masses of people angry, often for good reasons, coming out into the streets. And the way these things get settled sometimes is that those who are best organized settle them. And whether this would happen in Egypt or not, we don't yet know. But a hard-headed look at it has to assume that this is a possibility. And the Muslim Brotherhood is extremely well organized.
Of course, I agree with the speaker that this is definitely a possibility. But I mean, I want to get to explain that this is, again, it's the one-man rule for 30 years. People here have a very specific target, that this guy who has been in power for 30 years is enough for him right now. We want to be like the rest of the world. We want to have elections every 5 years, 6 years, 1 term, 2 terms maximum for president, but not president for life, and not that the president gives power after that to his son. And this is, I think, maybe the professor would agree with me on this, that it's relatively similar to what happened in Tunisia. In Tunisia, there was also a revolt against a man who was an oppressor for 23 years. He gave a lot of powers to his wife and the family of his wife. So people revolted against Ben Ali and against his family, and they ousted those people, but the state remained intact. And the people here in Egypt are not rebelling against the state. They are rebelling against this person who's been ruling us for 30 years. So we don't want to destroy the structures of the state. On the contrary, the people want to keep the structures of the state intact, and this is only one specific demand that they are running for.
Khaled Dawoud and Professor Mitchell Cohen, thank you very much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come on Independent Sources, why are internet service providers and net neutrality advocates both unhappy with a recent ruling in the battle for equal access to the internet?
Before that, Marlene Peralta has some other news.
Thanks, Gary. Here's a look at some headlines from the ethnic media. A group of rabbis is urging the Fox network to sanction journalist Glenn Beck. According to the forward, the rabbis want the TV personality disciplined for what they call completely unacceptable attacks on Holocaust survivor George Soros. Soros is a Hungarian-American businessman and philanthropist known for supporting liberal ideas and causes. The forward also notes the comments made by a senior Fox News official to Reuters accusing the left-wing rabbis of targeting Glenn Beck only for publicity purposes. America's Wire reports that a leading Venezuelan scientist is calling for the inclusion of more Hispanics and African Americans in genetic research. A Stanford University geneticist, Carlos Bustamante, says research is often focused on white populations and suggests that including more minorities is critical in determining root causes of many diseases. The award-winning doctor has helped expand testing for the 1,000 Genomes Project. The project expects to map the genes of at least 1,000 people worldwide. El Diario La Prensa reports that the rate of child obesity and depression is higher among Hispanics and African Americans. Experts attribute this problem to family habits and to cultural and economic factors. According to the Centers for Disease and Control, 27% of Hispanic boys are overweight. African American girls are particularly at risk, having the highest rate at 29%. And finally, from the Pakistani publication Daily Times, a report published by the Pew Forum on Religion reveals that the world's Muslims will grow twice as fast as non-Muslims over the next 20 years. According to the report, which was based on fertility, mortality, and migration rates, Muslims will make up 26.4% of the world's population, or a total of 8.3 billion people. Most of them will live in the Asia-Pacific region. Those are just a few headlines from the ethnic media. Back to Gary and Vianora in the studio.
Thanks, Marlene. The Federal Communications Commission, or the FCC, recently approved legislation that some critics say could affect the way that we all access the internet. The ruling denies fixed-line internet service providers the ability to limit access to certain sites, but affords more wiggle room to wireless service providers such as AT&T and Verizon.
The ruling is causing a stir because net neutrality advocates claim the FCC has essentially handed over the idea of an open internet to powerful corporations who could seek to limit access to information because it may affect their bottom line. On the other hand, the ISPs argue that they have limited bandwidth and have to charge consumers for increased usage.
I sat down with net neutrality advocate Tim Karr and communications attorney Goepp to talk about the recent ruling and the battle for one internet. Christine, can you explain to our viewers exactly what was passed and what is net neutrality?
Sure. From a consumer's point of view, net neutrality means that when you log on to the internet, you can go to any website that you want and you can send and receive any traffic that you want. And whether you get on it in one state or another state, or perhaps through your home PC or through your smartphone, that it would be more or less the same, that it would look the same, that there's one internet and all parts of it would be accessible to you. That's the basic idea, I think.
What was passed last month?
Well, nobody likes what was passed last month. Whether they're an advocate or an opponent, everyone finds fault with the order. But what it did was basically impose on wireline carriers a number of conditions, and then fewer conditions on wireless carriers. But from the carrier's point of view, we just talked about the consumer's point of view. From the carrier's point of view, they've got to let everything go through. They've got to let people go to websites. They've got to let traffic go through, subject only to this very vague provision that they can reasonably manage their networks. So nobody quite knows what that means yet.
Tim, this was a classic Washington sort of a compromise or mumbo jumbo of a final product where no one is happy at the end.
Well, I think perhaps the term compromise is too generous. I think what happened here was a real capitulation to the powerful corporate interests who have legions of lobbyists who've been visiting the FCC over the year that this process has been under deliberation, and they gave away too much of the public interest. They gave away too many protections and basically undercut the Federal Communications Commission's own authority to act as a watchdog, to look out for the best interests of internet users and to try to preserve the fundamental openness that we've come to take for granted in the last 15 to 20 years of using the internet. With this rule and with what we're actually seeing in the industry, all of that could change to the degree that the sort of control that consumers used to have, users used to have, over determining where they went and what they did on the internet will be shifting. It'll be shifting to powerful phone and cable companies and wireless carriers who would rather control those choices, rather profit from them at the expense of the free-flowing web that we've come to know.
Christine, when you look at this ruling by the FCC, why are advocates for the consumer groups so really incensed about the mobile part of it? Explain to us why there's such controversy surrounding mobile access.
Well, I think that mobile access is obviously popular, it's growing, it affects large portions of the population, and I think advocates were hoping that that one internet concept, I think I said to you earlier, would apply to wireless fully. The wireless industry argued a few points. You know, they said we're not like wireline, we have limited spectrum, you know, our hands are bound, we're new, we're still developing, don't stomp on us now. Was kind of, I think, and the FCC said, you know, all right, taking all that into account, we'll give you a couple of years. The FCC retained the right, as it were, to come back and perhaps impose some additional regulations on wireless.
Tim, recently Metro PCS has been in the crossfires of controversy. Can you explain to us exactly what they did and how is that a violation of net neutrality?
Sure. Metro PCS is a sort of a second-tier mobile phone service.
Sure.
And they have announced a new, what's called a data plan.
Okay.
Data plan, for those of us who access the internet via smartphones, is basically your ability to go online and share and connect to the internet and do all of the things that you would expect. But what Metro PCS is now proposing is a tiered service whereby if you buy in at their basic rate, you only get access, this is according to their advertising, to YouTube. You can't use competing video services, and in order for you to get access to other parts of the internet, you need to pay an extra rate. Now that is a fundamental violation of the concept of net neutrality, whereby all you need to do is pay for access. And once you get online, you have the freedom to connect to anyone else, whether it's a service, a video service, a service like Skype or anything like that the choice resides with the consumer. Metro PCS is taking that choice away. So in the wake of this FCC ruling, which happened in late December, we're already seeing these sorts of inroads by industry that try to take away that choice. So it is a very important case because what Metro PCS is doing today could set a model for larger carriers like Verizon and AT&T to follow in the future. And we need to make sure that the FCC is there acting as a consumer watchdog to sanction this sort of activity before it goes too far.
Christine, this fight or this battle has been going on for over 10 years. Why is this so important? Give us a sense of what's at stake here.
Well, you'll find different accounts of what has happened over the last 10 years. I think that people who don't want net neutrality in place will point to the fact that there's only been a limited number of actual cases of abuse that have come to light. In other words, they would say there is no problem here to address, and so the government shouldn't get too excited about imposing rules where there isn't a problem that is overreaching. On the other hand,
well, give me 1 second. How valid is that argument? Is it legitimate, or is this really corporations being greedy?
Well, I mean, in my view, it just depends on how you weight the values. You may tell yourself, I can see which way this is going, and I think that's what opponents do. They may say, yes, there's a very few number of cases, but I can see and use my logic to say, look, there's ways that carriers can get into packets now and look at them and prioritize them and slow them down that they didn't have before. And they have new reasons to that they didn't have before, because now there's voice and video. Well, they have voice and video on another channel running side by side that's in direct competition with it. So I think it's just a matter of how you view the situation, which side you're going to come down on.
Tim, this is also affecting poor people, minorities, young people who are now the primary users of PDA and mobile service.
Well, this is I think one of the biggest concerns that we have about the new FCC order is that it excludes mobile internet access from the sorts of net neutrality protections that we hope to see everywhere. As Christine said, it's one internet, and it should be one internet. It doesn't matter whether you're using a laptop, a PC, or a mobile device. You should get online and be able to choose where you go. And it's particularly concerning because increasingly, when you look at urban communities, communities of color, youth, they're using a mobile phone, a smartphone, as their primary point of access to the internet. So we are offering to these communities a much less open experience than others who can afford to get on by other means. So we very strongly believe that it's one internet. It doesn't matter what device you use. As soon as you plug in, whether it's wireless or by wired line, you are on the internet, and you cannot be discriminated against in the ways that we're now seeing with Metro PCS and we've seen in the past.
Now, this report is about 190-something pages long. Right. Lawyers are poring over them right now. Are we likely to see legal challenges to this ruling?
I think that you will see legal challenges in the very near future. As Christine had said, that there are people on both sides of the issue who aren't happy with the order. You could very well see a legal challenge coming from the carriers for some reason. You could also see consumers coming forth and saying, we're not sufficiently protected, we've been harmed in certain ways, and make a legal case to challenge the FCC's authority.
Christine, has that been done in the past? Can consumer groups win a challenge?
I couldn't tell you whether consumer groups themselves could win a challenge. Obviously, Comcast did challenge the jurisdictional basis of the rules successfully. And that sort of a challenge on the basis of jurisdiction, I think, seems to be a near certainty that there will be at least a challenge.
Unfortunately, we have to leave this conversation here. Christine Goepp, Tim Karr, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We'll be right back.
ActNow is a Brooklyn-based nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting the work of Black actors and filmmakers. Since 2004, the group has been putting together stage productions and film screenings featuring artists of color.
Abi Ishola recently spoke to some of the members of ActNow as they worked on putting the finishing touches on their upcoming documentary and feature film screenings in Brooklyn.
I had to go. You understand that?
Director Tanya Hamilton's film, Night Catches Us, is a fictional tale of a young man who came of age during the Black Power movement in the 1970s. He finds he's no longer welcome when he returns to his race-torn neighborhood. The critically acclaimed indie film is one of 5 features that will show this month at the New Voices in Black Cinema Film Festival in Brooklyn. Members of the Fort Greene-based organization, ActNow, began hosting the event 3 years ago. Their one major goal? Support the work of Black actors and filmmakers.
I think with independent filmmakers in general, and I would say Black independent filmmakers in particular, there's always a need to have support in the community to get our films made first and foremost, and then to get the films seen.
It's the very reason the group's executive director, Aaron Ingram, started ActNow.
ActNow was founded in 2004 out of my apartment. I have an actor's background, a director's background, and I just saw that there was a need to create an arts organization to be able to produce theater and film for artists of color.
The organization hosts actors and writers workshops, monthly short film screenings, and theater productions featuring performers of color. In 2009, Ingram and his team of fellow volunteers began showing full-length feature films and documentaries when they launched New Voices in Black Cinema. The organization later secured BAM Cinematheque as the venue. Ingram says having the event on such a grand scale was his ultimate goal.
It's always about being in the moment and always about being present. And, some of the things is, what can we do that help, new artists or artists that have been around to be able to get their work on a larger platform, get their work out to the audience, also out to the audience to their particular community, but also the surrounding communities. So it really chimes into our mission statement in terms of, getting the work out.
They also aim to show the best work possible. Films and documentaries chosen for the event are selected based on quality, marketability, and subject matter.
We're showing a number of really diverse films. One of them is a coming-of-age story called Money Matters. It's about a young 14-year-old girl that lives down in D.C. Her mother is really a mess. She's hooked on drugs and she's having a hard time raising her daughter because she's still dealing with abuse from her youth. The daughter, kind of lashes out, but it's really just a coming-of-age story about the young girl and how she uses poetry as an outlet for her own therapy.
New Voices in Black Cinema will air from February 4th through the 9th here at BAM Rose Cinemas. For Independent Sources, Abi Ishola.
That's our show this week. Thanks for staying tuned.
We invite you to join our conversation on Facebook. Till the next time, be independent-minded.